Hello, everyone. Good evening and welcome to Science on Film. My name is Teresa Scandifio, and I'm the Senior Manager of Adult Learning here at TIFF Bell Lightbox. We're delighted that you're here for tonight's Science on Film event, where our incredible host, Jay Ingram, will speak to our special guest, sexuality researcher and educator, Dr. Robin Milhausen, on Lawrence Kasdan's Body Heat. TIFF would like to thank our lead sponsor, Bell, major sponsors RBC, L'Oreal Paris, Visa and Audi, and our major public supporters, the Government of Canada, the Government of Ontario, and the City of Toronto. Thank you to our Science on Film partner, Penguin Books. We'd also like to recognize and thank some of our community members who have generously helped spread the word about Science on Film, the Royal Canadian Institute for the Advancement of Science, and Science Rendezvous. Yay! Come on, Pride, you're here. We have an update on the final Science on Film event of the series, taking place on June 27th. Due to a scheduling conflict, makeup artist Adrienne Moreau will not be joining us on June 27th. However, we're thrilled to announce that Canadian special effects and makeup design genius, Gordon Smith, will be with us to discuss his work on Catherine Bigelow's vampire western, Near Dark. Indeed, it's going to be fun. Gordon Smith is a 30-year veteran in the field, having worked with filmmakers including David Cronenberg and Oliver Stone. Mr. Smith is also behind the groundbreaking X-Men and X2 creations, including Wolverine, Mystique, and many others. Beginning August 17th, I love how animated y'all are. Ooh. TIFF presents X-Men master Gordon Smith, an exhibition in our Canadian Film Gallery that pays tribute to Smith's 3-decade career, so that'll be in August. We can't wait for Gordon Smith to share his experiences with our Science on Film audience on June 27th. So by now, you're all familiar with our Science on Film host, but I'll give a very brief introduction for any of you who are not. Jay Ingram has an extensive background in radio, television, and publishing. From Quirks and Quarks to Daily Planet and everything in between, Jay has been lauded and celebrated for what he does best, bringing science to the mainstream in interesting and accessible ways. So please join me in welcoming our host for Science on Film, Mr. Jay Ingram.
I thought because we were talking about sex, the place would be packed. But I am really happy that we're putting sex before vampires. Although vampires are really interesting scientifically. This is Robin Milhausen. She is a sex researcher at the University of Guelph in the Department of Family Studies and Human Sexuality, or something like that.
Family Relations and Applied Nutrition. Close.
That's funny. I thought that, anyway. She's an expert in sex. This movie has, a fair amount of sex in it. So, should be a great discussion. We'll talk to you after the movie. Thanks for staying. And thanks for laughing, too. Although I did hear a certain amount of laughing throughout the film. So for those of you who have not been here before, the routine is that Robin and I'm going to ask Robin some questions, and we will, get to hear some of her expertise. She is a sex researcher. She's not a sex therapist. So if you have questions along those lines, you have to find your own. And then after we talk for a little while, for 10 or 15 minutes, then we will throw it open to all of you. So I guess my first question is good sex really worth all of that?
I think the question is that good sex? Because if that's good sex, and it's often portrayed that way in the media, throw you up against the wall, rip off your clothes, murder people for it, that's not the kind of sex most people are actually having. So I think that this
That's
movie,
actually a relief.
Isn't it? Yeah. I think the media, and this film in particular, also set us up for these expectations of wild, unbridled sex that is so powerful it causes us to lose all reason. And most sex isn't like that.
So is that a bad thing, though? I mean, there must be some people who aren't acting who have sex like that. Yeah. So is that... let's say sex, there's a normal curve with bad sex here and most sex here, and then over here, people like that.
Yeah, true. And actually, there's a sex researcher and therapist in Ottawa named Peggy Kleinblatz who's studying optimal sexuality. So she is interested in seeking out those people who have those kinds of optimal, beyond great sexual experiences. And she's interviewed them, and they talk about this feeling of being transcendent sex. So there are people, and they tend to be people in the longest term relationships, so that's good. As opposed to in the media where it appears that all the great sex happens spontaneously in casual short-term relationships. The best sex tends to be, according to Peggy's research, by people who've been together decades even.
I mean, it's a movie and people will take it for what it is, but do you feel that this kind of view that you alluded to, wow, like, I think I'll throw a chair through a window. I want her so badly. See, I immediately thought of the property damage. So, I mean, is that a damaging image to send out there?
I think it is, because it sets up these unrealistic expectations for what sex is all about, and we see sexual desire, arousal problems are very common in North America today. There's some research that suggests about 43% of North Americans think they have some kind of a sexual dysfunction, and I think it comes from this idea that sex looks like that. It gives us something to strive for, perhaps, but it ends up probably making most of us feel like maybe there's something lacking in our own relationships if it's not worth throwing a chair through.
Let me just take that in a slightly different direction, because there seems to be some concern now that young people who are much more exposed, or at least have easier access to porn, at least boys get these crazy expectations about what sex would be like. First of all, do you think that's true? And second, is it potentially damaging?
Yeah, it's hard to say. The research suggests that, yeah, a lot of young people are getting a fair bit of sex education from pornography. And I think especially for young men, as they grow up, they start to believe that really exciting sex is the kind of sex they've seen in pornography. So, I mean, that kind of sex is set up to look exciting for camera angles, but actually isn't what good sex is all about. So if you're a guy who's grown up, and I say men because men are the biggest users of pornography, if you're a man who grows up looking at that and thinking that, all women look like that, all women have multiple orgasms, and all women like zero foreplay and violent thrusting, then yeah, you're going to be steered wrong in real relationships most of the time.
A slight little caveat there. So what would you say is good sex?
Good question. Peggy Kleinblatt suggests that it has to do with communicating with a partner on a higher level. So it's like your bodies merging. It's the ultimate in vulnerability. I think whatever good sex is, it depends on the couple. And for some couples, they like a lot of foreplay and intimacy, and communication is the road to that. For other couples, they like to flirt with danger and play with role-playing and force. And so it really depends on the individual couple what is great sex. I think the takeaway message is that when I'm talking to individuals and couples is that you really have to communicate what is this ideal sex for you and to your partner. And I think a lot of times couples don't discuss what makes great sex for them. And I think that is what leads oftentimes to infidelity. I don't think many couples have had that conversation. If we're going to be together, we're going to have sex exclusively for the next 50 years, what would it take to satisfy you? Hypothetically. But if couples could answer that question and would talk about it honestly, they would be more likely to get their own needs met in their dyad and not need to go out.
But do people even really know what is good sex for them?
Good question. I think we all can recall, people who have had any sexual experience can recall like one time that felt great, that excited us, that we play back in our fantasy, maybe when we're having not so good sex. So I think we can all figure out what are the elements that really make it for us, and I just think most often we don't share that information with our partners to a degree that it could be recreated.
Why?
Well, it's hard. Sex makes us vulnerable. And I think in our society still, there's a lot of taboo about talking about sex, about having sex, and about the kinds of things that are sexually exciting. There's a great author named Esther Perel who's written a book called Mating in Captivity. And she talks about the democracy of sex today, that we've whitewashed it. It's, may I do this? Can we do that? And it's become so polite that it's not exciting. So it may be difficult for us to say to our partners, it really excites me when you do A, B, or C, because we fear they might judge us or reject us. So it still is difficult to communicate our deepest, darkest sexual desires, I believe.
So would her research suggest that with time, attitudes and the willingness to discuss sex and even sexual practices are always evolving?
Yeah, and even within the relationship, they're always evolving. And that's why actually it's neat when I teach sexuality to the undergraduate classes that I lecture to, they're always worried about what's going to happen to sex when they're 40, 50, 60.
Well, I thought you meant just as a general question.
Yeah. No,
what is going to happen to sex anyway?
No, they're nervous. They think, and when I talk about, there are physical changes that occur with aging. For men, it takes them longer to get an erection. It takes them longer to ejaculate. For women, more difficulty lubricating. Did you know we were going to be talking about lubrication tonight? And less elasticity of the vaginal wall. So there are these physical changes that pose challenges. But for couples who've been together a long time, they're comfortable. They have figured out what works for them. And so actually some of the most sexually satisfied people are those who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, who've let go of expectations about body image, who've let go of, am I going to look bad at this angle? What about the noise my body makes when I get into this position? And they've let go of all that, and they are able to really be themselves sexually. So sex evolves, yes, over time, although we've been engaging in the same sexual positions. It's on cave walls, the positions we still engage in today. I think it's more interesting to look at how sex evolves in a couple throughout, the decades of a relationship if they make it that far.
Does sex within a couple or other factors of their relationship lead? Do you know what I mean? Like which sort of, if actually the physiological changes happen, the first question was the best. Mm-hmm. Which one leads?
And that's impossible to say. There's certainly one of the biggest predictors of sexual satisfaction is relationship satisfaction. One of the biggest predictors of relation, and vice versa. So it's difficult to pull apart. For men, those constructs tend to be more separate. So it would be easier for a man to be extremely sexually satisfied but not relationally satisfied, or vice versa. For women, it is a little more difficult. For women, it is harder to be sexually satisfied in general in a relationship that is not, characterized by trust and intimacy and respect. Those, of course, there are women for whom that's not the case, but it seems as though sexual and relationship satisfaction are more entwined for women than men. Although Esther Perel says that she's seen many relationships that are so characterized by trust and intimacy and respect that they've sort of beat the passion out of it. So for some people, all that intimacy is no longer hot. So there's that too.
So in the movie, and I think what is one of the most intriguing things about it is that this was a crafty, conniving, relentless woman. Was she genuine about her passion for him, or was that just part of the act?
And I've watched it now a few times, and even this time now, knowing what was the storyline, I was really attuned to her facial expression at the end of the movie, and it was really ambiguous, I think, on purpose, because I was trying to figure out, is she sad that this is the way it's turned out? She's all alone and her lover's in jail. She doesn't look particularly sad, but she doesn't look particularly happy either. She's not joyous. So I think that's the question for the viewer, and everyone would probably have a different idea. My husband and I talked about, did she really love him? Was she really attracted to him?
Because she protested that she did love him, that was a part that she hadn't anticipated.
And he even appeared to run to try and stop her from running into the boathouse when it was going to blow up. So perhaps he, knowing everything he knew, still loved her and felt like maybe she loved him to some degree.
Yeah, but the thing that struck me was that when he did throw the thing through the window and jump in, like they were both, but her particularly, so incredibly passionate. And, now I look back and I think, but, she was like, those were machinations going on in her mind then. How could she really appear to be so genuine?
Well, I think she could have been turned on. I think probably many of us would be very excited by a situation that is that dangerous, that's risky. I think there's a portion of the population who would never be excited in a high-risk situation. We've done research on factors that inhibit and enhance sexual arousal. And so for some people, like having sex in a risky place or having sex with a risky partner, that would never turn them on. But for others, the risk is what gets them off. to a great degree, and they aren't actually turned on by sex that isn't risky. So in this case, she knows in the back of her mind that she's seducing a man. She has to make him want her beyond belief so that he will do her bidding without her even asking. So that's exciting. That could be exciting to a certain kind of person, that the goal is to make someone desire you to that extent. And I think she was turned on by that.
And of course, we don't really even have to worry about whether he was turned on or not. That's kind of, it was his life.
Well, she's perfected it. She wore the white blouses, and she played the poor me trapped in a loveless, abusive relationship, while at the same time being extremely sexy. So it was the whole Madonna whore thing. She straddled both lines really quite well. So he was putty in her hands.
And straddled is, so just before we turn it to you, the audience, could you, because I've been asking you questions specifically about the movie, could you just sort of lay out for people here the kinds of research that you're involved in at Guelph?
Sure. I'm most interested in sexual desire and factors that turn people on, turn people off, and also motivations for sex. So in this movie, maybe one of her motivations for sex was sort of utilitarian. She had to make him fall in love with her so he would accomplish what she needed to have accomplished. And I'm interested in, does it make a difference what our reasons for sex are? For the longest time, we thought that desire is the main reason. Desire and procreation and love would be the only reasons to have sex. But recent research suggests we might have sex for hundreds of reasons, from duty and obligation, to get closer to God or feel closer to God, to give someone an STI, to because of a bet. There are lots of reasons, and I'm interested if it makes a difference to your own well-being or your relationship, if you have sex for reasons other than desire, and also what incites desire.
So just one more question, though, because so if her goal was, as you say, utilitarian, like she just wanted all that money, could that, because I was sort of thinking, she's thinking in the back of her mind, but maybe she doesn't have to, that maybe just the desire for money could be morphed into the desire for him?
I don't think it's necessary. I mean, she was able to pick a guy who was attractive in and of itself and masculine in and of itself. And he
very
was
sweaty.
And very sweaty. And there is research to suggest that there are hormones released in sweat that will draw us to a partner. So, and they really made that point clear. Everybody was sweating the whole movie. We get it. Sweat is hot. But, yeah, sorry, I got distracted.
Well, and what does that say?
Yeah.
No, so you started to say it probably wasn't necessary for her to have one trans. She could still, I guess, stand apart from what she was doing.
Yeah, and she could have picked anybody. Like, presumably in the movie, any guy could have been putty in her hands. So she could have picked somebody who was mousy or overweight or not charming, but she picked wisely, someone who she would probably enjoy having sex with along the way and get her needs met.
And besides, he was a dumb lawyer, and she knew that. That I didn't mean that to sound like lawyers are dumb. I meant he particularly. So we would now welcome questions from any of you in the audience about the movie, about sex, whatever. Yes. Sorry, I should say, as is the practice here, we really we need you to use a microphone, so don't just spontaneously start to ask a question. Please wait for the microphone.
Thank you. Could you talk about more in your research the difference between men and women? Looked like Ned had his brains in his pants. Is that typical that men are the aggressor?
Well, anytime I start talking about gender differences in sexuality, about 30% of the room gets quite upset because, for any guy, the stereotype of what a man is, always interested in sex, not interested in communication, not interested in relationship issues or variables. There are many men in the room who will say that's not me, and there are many women who would act, in ways that we see as stereotypically male. But I think these stereotypes actually are here for a reason. So when I did my research on factors that inhibit and enhance sexual arousal, I was curious. Are men really turned on by everything, and women by a few things that are relational in nature? And is men's arousal more robust to things that might turn a person off? And so we asked men and women, 18 to 30 years old in this study, about 200 things that could turn a person on or off at any given time. So someone walking in during sex, conflict in your relationship. And in almost every case, men were more turned on by everything that was an arouser. And in almost every case, women were more turned off by things that were inhibiting. So it appeared as though women have a more attuned reflex to risky sex. So it makes sense that women wouldn't be turned on by everything. Like from an evolutionary perspective, and even from a practical perspective, if women were turned on the way that men were, quite easily by a wide variety of stimuli, they might engage in a ton of risky sex. They might get pregnant, and then they are burdened with an offspring for 18 years or longer. If women and if a guy and a girl have sex and he has an STI, she's much more likely to get an STI from he than vice versa, because she has an open reproductive system and mucous membranes and things. So from an STI perspective, sex is more risky for women. From a pregnancy perspective, sex is more risky for women. From a reputation perspective, sex is more risky for women. So if you think about social or evolutionary explanations, it makes sense that women would have a shutoff valve, like, I better not do this. Whereas for men, from an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense that men would want to have sex with as many people as possible, spread their seed widely, etc. But from a social perspective, men are often rewarded for having many partners, and sex is really pleasurable. So you don't have to buy into evolutionary theory to see that it would make sense socially for men and women to be, in general, different. But in any given couple, there's a wide variation over time, and across a population, there are always men who are acting more stereotypically female ways and vice versa.
And you said you don't have to buy into evolutionary theory, but there's a very healthy area of research right now arguing that, in fact, much of our sexual behavior has been established in over evolutionary time. So just quickly, in general, and I'm really, really generalizing here, men are on the lookout for fertile women because they can mate many, many times, and basically that's all they have to do. Women, on the other hand, may or should be more attracted to men who show they have a lot of resources, because the woman's got to invest 9 months of pregnancy, 2.5 years of nursing. All of those take 20 to 25% more energy than just existing, and then of course it could be the dreaded 18 years as well. And so a mate with resources is more important. And so from that sort of dichotomy, you can build all kinds of castles of theory, which we're probably not going to go into, but it's out there right now. And
there are some interesting modern day studies trying to get at those hypotheses. There's a really interesting study where they had women who worked as exotic dancers in strip bars chart their menstrual cycle and also record their tips. And the women who were ovulating made more money than the women who were not ovulating. So they were, and obviously their patrons would have no idea whether a woman was ovulating or not, theoretically, but they were more attractive to the men. So evolutionarily, this would suggest fertile.
And if I'm thinking of the same study, the women themselves had never correlated their menstrual cycle with their tips.
Right.
It was only upon doing the study they realized, hey, it's when I'm ovulating.
Yeah.
You better ask more questions, or we're just going to be up here talking about everything. No? Nobody? I can't believe you have no questions. Yes, you're. Well, how about if we bring a mic to you, and then you'll be able to formulate that question. There's somebody up in the corner there, please. I haven't had to do this before, actually.
I think a few people do. This woman had a question.
Yep. Thank you for passing the mic along there. And there's a gentleman up in the corner there that also.
Just wondering what you think will be the impact of this strain of gonorrhea, which is not treatable now. It's sort of come back again. It was in the news today that it's non-treatable.
I didn't see that in the news today. It is true that bugs, viruses, and bacteria can evolve, but I actually wasn't aware of that one, so I can't comment on it, sorry.
It's multiply antibiotic resistant, then? Is that the idea?
Yeah, it's a strain that has become resistant to drugs. So, in the 60s, we had gonorrhea, we treated it. But if you can't treat it, what will it do to sexual behavior?
Yeah, well, we already have, viruses that, herpes, HIV, that can be treated but not cured. So we have, as a society, experience with that. Even what we know about viruses, for example, HPV was considered to be something that you were going to carry with you for your whole life. And now we're seeing that the body can actually rid itself of HPV, and often does within a period of years. Many people who had HPV, the virus, human papillomavirus, no longer do. So science is always evolving, and bacteria and viruses are evolving as well. I think that gonorrhea in particular, being something that doesn't go away or isn't treatable, won't impact things more greatly than the viral STIs we already have that we carry for a lifetime.
Yeah, do you think maybe the character in this movie was a sociopath? Do you ever come across people like that in your research?
Well,
does it have an impact on
Yeah, it's interesting. My husband is a psychologist. He's here tonight, and in the car we were talking about, like, what would this person be diagnosed with, and he would be better equipped to answer that question than I. But yeah, he said she was diagnosable, and she has a lot of characteristics. I know she seemed to act without any remorse or fear about repercussions. She acted in going against social norms. It's not normative to seduce somebody to try and kill your husband. So yeah, I think that she could be diagnosed with a personality disorder, but that made it for a good movie. No, although we don't usually give personality inventories. Not all the time. The types of personality characteristics that I've studied in my work are more likely to be like sexual sensation seeking. So I'm interested in people who are really aroused by risky situations and novel situations, and what does that do in terms of their sexual health behavior and their relationship satisfaction. But that's as far as I'd get on the line towards like pathology.
So just a question about what's diagnosable and what isn't. I mean, you've seen a lot of people who get aroused by very different things. Is there a point at which the thing that arouses you is considered to be diagnosable?
Well, right now we're in the middle of adapting the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which catalogs all disorders. And there's a lot of debate, actually, particularly going on related to women's sexuality and what constitutes a disorder related to women's sexuality. As well, there's been some discussion about in terms of the paraphilias, so being aroused by shoe fetishes or other types of interesting and rare sexual arousal patterns. What is normative and what's a problem? Typically, one of the criteria that's used is it distressing to you, and is it getting in the way of your life? So if you are masturbating chronically and it's getting in the way of you getting to work on time, and it's getting in the way of you holding down your job or maintaining your relationship, and it's leading to chafing repeatedly, and it's distressing you, then that could be a problem. So typically, to what degree does this interfere with your life? To what degree is it hurting other people? And to what degree does it cause you distress? Those would be some things people would be looking at when they're trying to determine, is this a problem or just a variation of normal behavior?
Is nymphomania a real thing?
Well, people disagree about this idea of sex addiction. Like, can you be addicted to sex? Sex is not a substance. You don't typically go into a withdrawal without having sex, and you don't tend to need to escalate higher and higher and higher levels of sex. But some people really believe that there is such a thing as sex addiction. And for people who do engage in sexually compulsive behavior, for many of them, it is helpful to think about the addiction model, to sort of externalize, like, I have this problem, this addiction is controlling me, and to think about it outside of them and follow the 12-step program. But in the research literature, many of us prefer to talk about sexually compulsive behavior as opposed to labeling an individual as a nymphomaniac or a sex addict. But there is disagreement among sex researchers and therapists. For sure, there isn't consistency.
Well, I noticed in the film that the seductress, she had a lot of power that's usually a male has, the money. She was kind of the aggressor in the relationship. And in your research, do you find that when women do take on the role of the aggressor, they have more resources or power in the relationship?
Well, I think she reminds me of something that we see in the literature that's called the highly sexual woman, and it's been studied only a small amount because it's sort of a rare kind of woman, a woman that knows what she wants sexually, isn't afraid to get it, and that typically is associated with, you know, high confidence, good self-esteem, often attractiveness. So all of those things, attractiveness, self-esteem, would help a woman not only gain sexual power but other resources. She's smart too, so being smart, being attractive will help her in the world. She uses those talents for evil rather than for good. But certainly I think, yeah, that goes hand in hand. It's not going to work with every guy. I mean, perhaps some men in heterosexual relationships still want to be the one who seems to be dominant in the relationship and with regard to sex. But for many men, it's arousing to throw off that power and let someone else take control. That's why we see many men in, say, BDSM relationships where they play with power, wanting to be the submissive one. He's in charge all day at work, and he wants to come home and be tied up and let someone else take the reins. So it wouldn't work for every man, but she seems to have it down pretty well.
Some of us feel tied up at work, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, we have another question.
Hi. Yeah, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the research on contraceptives and whether they're inhibitors or, if they arouse people and how that works with different genders and whatnot.
Yeah, sure. So I think likely you're talking about hormonal contraception, which has been shown to. Oh, okay. Well, the most of the research in this area suggests that hormonal birth control can lead to decreased desire in women. And so if a woman presents with their doctor or sex therapist and says, I don't have any desire for sex, I'm totally not interested, one of the things that the doctor or therapist will ask is about hormonal contraceptive use. It's one factor. But I think there are many other factors. How long have you been in the relationship? How happy are you in the relationship? What kind of stresses are you experiencing at work? Do you have young kids in the home? So I think that biology is one part of it. And sometimes for some women, switching birth control, getting off hormonal birth control, their desire can go right back up. But for others, it's a more complex problem that often has to do with life circumstances. I think the biggest thing that decreases desire is life. It's busy life and it's financial demands, work demands, family demands. It's routine in our relationships. It's monotony. It's a lack of sexual communication. So I think certainly hormonal contraception can be one factor, but if we pin all our hopes on that and then switch it and the problems are still there, it could be some of these other life factors. For men, using the male condom can be a dampener of desire just because it can inhibit sensation, or even the delay between getting an erection and engaging in sexual activity. There's putting on the condom, which could reduce arousal during that time. One new condom advance, which I'm really excited about, is the Trojan Naked Sensations condom. So for people who are condom users and finding that to be like a challenge in terms of arousal, it's tight at the base, but it is loose all the way up the shaft. Did you know we were going to talk about shafts? and that I was going to do this on stage? And on camera, awesome. The Naked Sensations condom allows for sliding along the shaft of the penis, which makes it more pleasurable. If people are having problems using condoms, you can put a drop of water-based or silicone lubricant inside the condom, as well as on the outside, so that the condom slides a little bit on the penis. Also helps to reduce friction, which can reduce breakage. So condoms reducing arousal, even for in a heterosexual relationship, sometimes women feel like a condom is a latex barrier to intimacy. Like, I want to feel close to you. Take off the condom. I hear that in my research with young women, which is unfortunate because that's risky. But yes, I think condom use and hormonal contraception can impact desire and arousal, as can many other factors.
So those people who like to have sex in risky situations, do they like not to use condoms? For
some of them, yeah. Some of them, yes. Some of them, no. We actually see more condom use in casual relationships than in committed relationships, though. So actually, one of the biggest predictors of condom non-use is trust, intimacy, commitment, connection. Because as soon as you get to that stage in a relationship, you think, oh, we're in love and we're monogamous and we're not at risk anymore. And as soon as you get there, often, for adolescents, that's about 3 weeks in, for your information. If you have adolescents, really solid research out of the US suggests that if about 3 weeks into an adolescent relationship, it begins to approximate a longer-term relationship. So at that point, condoms go out the window. So we actually see more condoms in casual encounters. I just did a review of the literature on this, and people who exchange sex for money or drugs, you might think, well, that's the riskiest of all. But often condoms are used in those situations. It's in those loving, romantic relationships where to introduce a condom would be to suggest, well, you're a risk to me. And I wouldn't sleep with anyone who's risky, so obviously we don't need to use condoms.
Yes.
I'm not sure I'll put this right, but I'll try. When you fall deeply in love and have massive sex, like portrayed in the film, as far as I know, there's a fair amount of research that shows that that's actually sort of temporary insanity.
Yeah.
Having experienced it a few times, I would say it definitely is.
Yeah.
But can you have,
You seem to have recovered okay, though.
Can you have great sex without love?
Oh, I think you can. I actually think you definitely can. I think maybe a trickier question to answer is, can you have great sex without mutual respect? Like, if you're being used and you know you're being used, and you don't like the person and you don't feel like they like you in return, it might be harder to have great sex unless you're that specific kind of person who gets off on that kind of sex. But I think absolutely you can have hot sex without love. Most times in today's society, they're linked. But I really appreciated your comment about early in the relationship, like mental illness. Research suggests that when you're really in that early stage of romantic love, it's similar to your brain on cocaine. So you're hitting all the pleasure centers. And another tip is that sometime between 6 and 30 months, research suggests you're going to switch from that passionate, really intense state of romantic love to something that's more companionate, and sometime, and that will last, inevitably. But we see actually a lot of relationships ending now, like at the 3-year mark, because people think, oh, we've lost the passion. Something's wrong in our relationship. This is broken. I better end this and find the next relationship. And then, strangely enough, between 6 and 30 months, they lose that again. It's companionate. They end that relationship, and we are never satisfied. So I think being aware that you can't maintain, for most people, that level of passionate love, and you wouldn't even want to, because it gets in the way of your work. You're thinking about this person all day at work. It gets in the way of your other life goals. So evolutionarily, it would make sense that we would switch from this passionate, intense love, which bonds us together, to something that's more companionate, which we can maintain throughout a lifetime at the same time as raising our family and maintaining our career and achieving our other life goals.
So it makes sense from an evolutionary point of view, but a lot of people don't handle it very well.
True. You're absolutely right.
And we don't get much training or
Totally.
warning.
Yeah.
This is not going to last. I mean, you can say that, but you don't believe it.
Right. And that's the thing. Every time we hit that kind of romantic, intense love, we think, no one has ever felt this way before. I've never felt this way before. But if you actually wrote down all those exact feelings, you probably were feeling those exact feelings the last time you fell in love intensely, and you would feel them again the next time you fell in love intensely. But we feel like we're the only ones in the world who've ever felt this passionately. It's never going to go away. I mean, how many of you knew that between 6 and 30 months, you were all of a sudden going to experience this kind of shift? I don't see many hands. But that's not cause for, I think, depression. We can create a sex in our long-term relationships that is even more fulfilling and satisfying than the kind we had at the early days. We know each other better. We feel more comfortable. We can let go of our inhibitions. If we are willing to communicate and take risks with our partners, it can still be great. It likely won't be exactly like it was, but it can be better.
But once every 6 months it is. It's not a personal comment. Do you have any? Yes, question down here.
Thank you. Just one question. The stereotype for men is that they're more visual than women. They're more visually attractive. Do you get the sense, whether or not this is something that should be accepted, do you get the sense this is something that women are accepting more today? Because in popular culture, so many movies and TV shows, women are often disgusted by men's, focus on visual things. They don't seem to understand it. And sometimes you get the sense that women have an idea of what a man should be attracted to. And you see that in films where the man comes around and finds out, wow, you really are hot, you know, and this is, there's got to be both, you know, you've got to think with both heads to some degree when it comes to a sexual relationship. And I'm wondering if you sense any meeting of the minds in that respect, that might be something that is being more accepted, that men can't be blamed that much for what, you know, for what they find attractive?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, to what degree do we believe we have choice over what turns us on and what doesn't? And even to what degree are we aware of what turns us on and what doesn't? So actually, Meredith Chivers out of Queen's University has done research where she has had men and women looking at various types of sexual stimuli. You know, men having sex with men having sex with women having sex together, actually even bonobo monkeys having sex. And women's bodies respond to all those types of sexual stimuli. In fact, I mean, the blood flow to the vagina, arousal, probably lubrication in tandem. But they, on the questionnaire, are like, no, that doesn't turn me on. No, that doesn't turn me on. No, that doesn't turn me on. So women may be as aroused by certain types of visual stimuli as men are, but they're not subjectively aware of it, even if their body is responding. And so then what kind of, which do we go with? Do we go with how their body's responding, or do we go with what their voicing is attractive to them or is stimulating to them? And I think you got to go with what women say they want. But I guess Meredith's research suggests that women are aroused by visual stimuli to a great degree, and maybe more than women were aware of. Whether women are becoming more acceptive of men being turned on by visual stimuli, probably not in our own relationships. You see your partner checking out that girl walking down there, you're probably still going to elbow him in the ribs and say, not acceptable. You catch him watching pornography on the computer at 2 in the morning when he's supposed to be in bed with you, you're probably still going to be a little bit upset about those things. So I think we are aware of what works for men, but it doesn't always make it easier in our own relationships.
Sometimes you get that in films and TV, you know, as well, that women don't sometimes seem to be quite disdainful often of the Baywatch type, you know,
yeah.
You know, that it's, and as I say, that's something that you know, men can't really help, I guess.
And I think actually women value attractiveness as well. You know, the mate selection research suggests that certainly like around times of ovulation, women are more likely to value really attractive men. Women are interested in having more sex around that time of ovulation with really attractive men. I actually did a study a few years ago at Guelph where we had undergraduates, and we hooked them up to a fake lie detector, and we told them this lie detector was going to be able to tell, you know, whether they were lying or not. And they filled out a questionnaire about what things that they considered attractive. We had another group of people who had to fill out the same questionnaire about what they were attracted to, but they had to hand it to a research assistant who was going to read it, and then they were going to discuss it. So we were trying to, you know, if you know you have to fill out a questionnaire and then discuss it with somebody, you're probably more likely to choose responses which would be acceptable to society. And indeed, we found that the women who were in that questionnaire condition were much less likely to say attractiveness matters, but in the lie detector condition, there wasn't a difference in terms of how much women and men valued attractiveness in a partner. So women care too about attractiveness, especially if they're having sex. You know, it's risky to have sex as a woman in terms of your reputation. So if you're going to have sex, or casual sex in particular, you got to make it worth it. And that's why women are more likely to have casual sex with really attractive guys, because...
and it's worth it.
Yeah, and it's worth it.
Seems pretty self-evident to me. I have one more question, and it isn't even really about sex, but do you think she did fall in love with him?
No,
Could we have a vote? Who thinks no? Oh, you're so cynical, all of you.
I think she wasn't capable of it.
Yeah, there were a lot of female voices raised in response to that comment. Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah. If you're going to ask a question or comment, we'd love to get a microphone to you, please. Can we go for another couple of quick minutes? Yeah.
Well, because you just reminded me, when we look at this movie, we see a one-time situation, you know, of some length, but one time. But she's got a past. And I think that she's done this over and over. She talks about this lawyer she worked with after her drug problem. I'm pretty sure that wasn't just a professional relationship. So she comes to this with a history.
Yeah, and a personality. Like, I think that's what my husband and I were talking about in the car on the way. Like, and we were wondering, how much hope is there for changing, a person like this? And likely, like, these are well-ingrained personality traits that were born of who knows what kind of a childhood and relationship with family or genetic makeup. So, yeah, I think you're right. This wasn't a one-time thing for her. And the fact that she didn't look like she was showing much remorse at the end suggests that personality traits.
I just wanted to ask you about the very last scene. I'm over here. Where she seems quite indifferent, but there was a man beside her, wasn't there?
Mm-hmm.
Like, but you just got a tiny flash of him. Like, what did he say to her?
I think he said it's hot.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So,
and then then there'd be the body heat too. Could we get so one here, and then we'll get one down here finally, and that'll be it. Thanks.
I just wanted to ask a question. It diverts from the film, but just about pop culture and large, I guess. In large, is like, this is such a stylized version of sexuality and sexual relationship, and we might have more access to. We seem to have more access to. And like with cable television and pornography as well, and with on depictions of sexuality, but it seems a lot more frank. And I just wanted to see what your opinion was, like with movies like Shame and in Mad Men and Girls in particular. Mm-hmm. They're not glamorized. They're to a certain degree extremely ugly, and they show such the warts of warts and all. And like, it might be. I just want to see what your opinion is on, like, there's more of a stronger emphasis on sexuality, but it's also messy. And is that good or bad for our conversation?
Yeah. I think it is good. I think it is good to show more than just one depiction of sexuality. And, the Girls show in particular shows like the whole spectrum of things that can go on with women and sexuality. And I think that's really good. We still don't see, minority voices portrayed as often as majority voices in mainstream media. But we're getting there. And if you have an interest in some kind of like non-dominant sexual discourse, you can find it. You can find a community of people and resources related to that on the internet. So I think, yes, we have a greater access to broader depictions of sexuality today, and that is a good thing. And it's good to see that it's messy. Because it is.
Yeah.
Just referring back to the film, I don't think our reaction to the movie is cynical. I think in the script, the Maddie character says, "You're not very bright, are you? I like that in a man." Yeah. And he accepted that. Yeah. I mean, I don't know very many men who would accept that.
Because he wasn't thinking.
Well, that's right. He'd stopped thinking. And then when he really grasped what had happened to him in prison, he observed she was relentless. There was no letting up with her. She was going to have her way.
And
she's totally steamrolled him.
Oh. And I think the other thing she says is, she said earlier on, men catch a whiff and they don't stop trailing. So that comes from her experience. Like, she has seen men fall at her feet and do her bidding for many years of her life, and so has had experience with that.
Okay, this will be the last one for sure, because we're all a little bit pressed for time.
Okay, so there is a SCTV skit called Prickly Heat. I don't know if people have seen that. Where they make fun of the body heat. It's an adaptation. Edith Prickly plays the role that Catherine
I'd
Turner
love to see that.
Wow.
And they do put emphasis on that quote. I thought it was something they made up, because at one point Joe Flaherty goes to light the lighter and there's the big flame. She goes, "You're dumb. I like that in a man." And I think that they really get that's one of the.
What better end could we have than a reference to SCTV? Robin Milhausen, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.